You're standing in a store or scrolling a checkout page, and you hesitate. Not because you did the math, not because you checked your account. Something else happens first, something faster than thinking. A sentence surfaces, one you haven't consciously heard in years, maybe decades. It doesn't arrive as a memory. It arrives as a fact, as something simply true. And you obey it, the same way you did when you were 7 years old and had no idea you were being given a rule that would still be running your life this far into adulthood. Here's the strange part. Financial psychology research suggests that a single repeated phrase from childhood, something as ordinary as money doesn't grow on trees, or we can't afford that, can go on shaping financial decisions for decades. Not because you remember hearing it, precisely because you don't. It stopped being a sentence somewhere along the way and became something that just feels true, operating completely outside conscious awareness, long after the moment it was actually said has been forgotten entirely. So what exactly is still running in the background? Think about the specific phrases that might apply to you. We don't waste money in this family. You get what you pay for. There's never enough to go around. Rich people are greedy. Save it for a rainy day. None of these sound like rules when you hear them again as an adult. They sound like values, like things you personally believe, arrived at through your own reasoning. That's exactly what makes them so easy to miss. Two people can earn the exact same income and make completely different decisions with it, not because one is more disciplined, but because one of them grew up hearing "we can't afford that," and the other grew up hearing "you get what you pay for." Neither of them remembers the sentence clearly today. Both of them are still, in a very real sense, obeying it. Notice where these sentences actually show up. Not in big financial decisions, where you'd expect to think carefully. In the small ones. The checkout line. The moment before opening an app. The half-second of hesitation before agreeing to split a bill evenly instead of by what each person ordered. That's exactly where an old rule operates best, in the moments too small and too fast for you to notice you're following one at all. So why does one sentence carry that much weight? The mechanism is more specific than simply having a childhood shaped by money. Researchers who study financial socialization distinguish between two different ways children absorb ideas about money. One is implicit, simply watching how the adults around them behave. The other is explicit, actual verbal messages, spoken directly, often repeated so many times they stop registering as language at all and start operating as instinct. This explicit channel is the one that matters here, and it's been studied as its own distinct mechanism, separate from simply modeling behavior. A sentence repeated enough times in childhood doesn't get filed away as an opinion someone once shared. It gets filed away as a fact about how the world works. And facts don't get reconsidered. They get obeyed. There's a reason repetition specifically is, "What does this?" A single conversation about money, even an important one, tends to get stored the way most memories are, attached to a place, a feeling, a moment you can at least partially recall. A sentence said dozens of times over years doesn't get stored as an event at all. It gets stored as background knowledge, the same category your brain uses for things like knowing which way is up. That's precisely why so many people can feel the pull of an old money rule without being able to recall a single specific time it was said to them. This is where the research becomes genuinely useful, and not just interesting. In a well-known study published in the Journal of Financial Therapy, researchers identified 4 common patterns that these inherited beliefs tend to fall into. Patterns they called money scripts. Money avoidance, the belief that money is bad or that you don't deserve it. Money worship, the belief that more money will finally solve everything. Money status, the belief that your worth is tied to your net worth. And money vigilance, a strong pull toward frugality and caution, often paired with real discomfort, even discussing money out loud. These 4 patterns aren't equally neutral. Research following people who score highly on avoidance, worship, or status tends to find worse financial outcomes over time. Lower net worth, more financial stress, more compulsive spending. Vigilance looks different. People with a strong vigilance script are, on average, less likely to spend compulsively or ignore their finances entirely, though that same vigilance can tip into its own kind of problem. A level of anxiety about money that never really settles even when the numbers are fine. No single script is simply good or bad. Each one is a trade-off, inherited long before anyone was old enough to choose it. Each of these tends to trace back to a specific kind of message heard early and often. And here's what's genuinely counterintuitive about the research. It isn't simply that children absorb whatever their parents happen to say. The evidence points specifically to explicit, repeated verbal communication as its own distinct pathway, working differently than the general influence of simply growing up around a certain financial environment. The exact sentence matters, not the vague impression. The specific words, repeated often enough to stop sounding like words. None of this is meant to suggest one single sentence is the entire explanation for your financial life, and it would be dishonest to present it that way. But as a way of understanding why an old, specific phrase can still carry so much unexamined authority, it holds up. And that raises the only question that actually matters. If a sentence like that is still running quietly in the background, what happens once you actually hear it again? Here's the part that changes everything once you actually see it. The goal isn't to blame whoever said it to you. Most parents who repeated a phrase like "we can't afford that" or "money doesn't grow on trees" were speaking honestly from their own circumstances, their own fears, their own version of trying to keep you safe. The sentence made complete sense in the context it was said in. The problem was never that the sentence was said. The problem is that it never got revisited. That's really the entire shift. Not rejecting where the belief came from. Just finally asking whether it still applies to the actual life you're living now, rather than the one it was originally built for. It also isn't therapy, and it doesn't require reconstructing your entire childhood. Financial therapy research on this is fairly modest in its claims. It doesn't promise that tracing a script back to its origin fixes anything by itself. What it describes is smaller and more honest than that. That the moment of actually seeing where a rule came from tends to be a meaningful turning point. Not a guaranteed one, but a real and repeatable starting point for people who go looking for it. So what does this look like in practice? It starts with something small and specific. Try to recall one exact phrase about money that you heard repeatedly as a child. Not a general feeling, an actual sentence in someone's actual voice. Once you have it, ask who said it and what their life looked like at the time they were saying it. What were they afraid of? What were they trying to protect you from? Then ask the only question that actually matters. Is that still true for your life today? A sentence born from real financial scarcity decades ago might have been completely accurate then, and still be quietly overriding decisions now in a life that doesn't match those original conditions at all. The final step is small on purpose. Choose one upcoming decision this week where you can consciously test the sentence instead of automatically obeying it. If the sentence has been, "we can't afford that," that might mean actually running the real numbers on one specific purchase instead of ruling it out by reflex. If the sentence has been, "you get what you pay for," it might mean noticing a moment where the cheaper option is genuinely fine, and choosing it deliberately instead of on autopilot in either direction. If the sentence has been more about status, something like "we don't buy cheap things," it might mean choosing the plain version of something on purpose, and simply noticing whether anything bad actually happens. It usually doesn't. Small, specific tests like this are what actually start to loosen an old rule's grip. Simply thinking about it rarely does. One sentence, tested once, won't undo 20 or 30 years of repetition, and it isn't supposed to. The realistic version of this practice is picking one sentence at a time, testing it deliberately, and repeating the same process the next time an old rule surfaces somewhere else in your financial life. It's less like flipping a switch and more like slowly rechecking a set of instructions you never actually agreed to, one at a time, until fewer of them are running without your permission. None of this promises a dramatic transformation, and it isn't meant to. What it offers instead is something more honest and, over time, more useful. A shift from reacting to an old sentence to actually deciding, as the person you are now, with information and circumstances your 7-year-old self never had access to. Picture a decision a year from now, made the same way most of your decisions are made today, except for one difference. The old sentence still surfaces, because sentences like that don't simply disappear. But this time you notice it arrive, you recognize whose voice it actually belongs to, and you get to choose, consciously, whether it still deserves the authority it's had for decades. That's a realistic outcome, not a guaranteed one. But it's a far more honest goal than pretending the sentence was ever going to just vanish on its own. That's really the difference worth aiming for. Not a completely different relationship with money. Just a financial life that's actually being run by the person who's old enough to evaluate the rules it's built on, instead of a sentence that was never revisited after the day it was first said. So the next time you feel that reflexive hesitation before a decision, the one that arrives before any actual thinking happens, it might be worth pausing on it for just a moment. Whose sentence is that, really? And is it still true? Or is it simply the loudest voice left over from a version of your life you don't actually